The $20 trillion lie. Why Europe's rivers are about to collapse global trade. Barges sat crooked in a single-file graveyard near Kaub, engines idling, decks half empty. Onshore, a plastic supervisor stared at a red dashboard. Resin late, line paused, penalties ticking. In Basel, a power buyer whispered, throttle non-peak, while a hospital signed for extra diesel. It looked like drought, but that's not the story. The lie is simpler and worse. Europe planned for canals and ports, not the river that actually moves its economy. Leaders said temporary anomaly. Insurers priced seasonal variance. Meanwhile, draft limits flipped contracts to emergency. Who knew the calendar of collapse, and why bet you wouldn't notice until your bill did? To see how one number can tilt an economy, you start at Kaub. Not for drama, for decisiveness. When the gauge drops past comfort, drafts shrink, tonnage falls, and the math stops working. Shippers don't argue with physics, they unload. Chemicals detour, coke, ore, and fuels trickle. Containers get rolled. The Rhine isn't a route, it's the conveyor under Europe's factory floor. Pull power from that belt and upstream machines rattle. Freight dependency makes it plain. Barges carry what rail can't surge and trucks can't absorb at cost. Germany and the Netherlands dominate inland ton kilometers. Along the Rhine, the heavy shares tell you why. Petroleum products, chemicals, ores, metals, aggregates. In the first half of 2023, CCNR data logged 31.66 million tons of petroleum products, 22.87 million tons of chemicals, 11.31 million tons of iron ore, and container volumes down 15.8% year-over-year. When water falls, those molecules wait. Insiders watch a trigger band. Kaub clears comfortably above 200 cm, below -120 cm, drafts tighten, push toward -78 cm, and operators strip loads, flirt with cm, and the corridor derates hard. Low water surcharges appear. Loads get cut. Buyers flip to emergency profiles. These aren't heroics, they're humiliations that compound. Feedstock by truck at triple cost, inventory staged at the wrong depot, oversized pieces refused for lack of escorts. Every workaround buys a day and sells precision. Just in time becomes just in case, late. Footnotes hide the truth. Annual reports say temporary anomaly. Ministries file inter-annual variability. But the physics trends the other way. Alpine snowpack thinner, melt peaking earlier, base flows lower. Hydrology misaligns the calendar. The river is teaching a new baseline. Ledgers pretend it's a quiz. Insurance stops pretending first. Premiums step by season and centimeter. Low water clauses legalize detours, delays, and demurrage. Demurrage clocks don't care about rainfall, they care about openings at a jetty. One deviation cascades to missed slots, then throttled plants, then margin calls. Multiply that across corridors and you don't get headlines, you get cash trapped in yards. Zoom to scope. Chemicals live by the Rhine, feedstocks in, solvents and intermediates out. Steel breathes it, ore and coking coal inbound, coils outbound. Autos don't admit it until resins, coatings, harness components tie to river yards. Energy inputs, diesel, gas oils, heating fuels, float inland because tonnage beats asphalt. The indirects show up in invoices. Packaging resins pricier, fertilizer a week late, station diesel rationed. In 2022's crush, ARA Rhine spot rates spiked. By early 2023, they normalized with water, proof that freight pricing rides the gauge. Here's the lie, nobody denies the Rhine matters. The lie is pretending this is fixable with press releases while running on the same thin margin. Resilience turned into hope and PR. Rail is full where it's flat and straight. Sidings are scarce where surge is needed. Road can shift edges, not core volumes, and not at comparable cost. Inland navigation still carries the heavy molecules of Europe's metabolism. Take away draft, and the patient coughs. Walk One factory, a polymer unit near Ludwigshafen watches Kaub like a biometric. Dip below the threshold, and trucks get pre-booked at eye-watering day rates. Runs cap to what asphalt can carry. A supervisor reorders blends toward higher margin per ton. The warehouse stacks pallets for a week that won't cooperate. 2 towns over, a coatings maker calls an auto plant. Specification swap approved with a warranty rider. In Basel, a refinery rebalances flows and pulls optional terminal slots. No one says crisis, they call it Tuesday. Ports feel it sideways. Rotterdam and Antwerp stay busy, inland terminals log idle hours, barges present light, time between calls stretches, crane utilization dips, throughput holds, cadence breaks. A skipper logs another anchor night. The insurer emails, document instructions, paperwork becomes oxygen. Redundancy looks nice on a map. Rhine-Main-Danube suggests options. In practice, bottlenecks align. Locks that hum in average years turn into patience tests. One outage during a thin week rewrites a month. You can dredge a shoal, deepen a bend, and still face a hot spell that shaves the river thinner than your last contour. Households meet the river at checkout. Plastics cost more when naphtha or ethylene arrive late. Fertilizer hikes creep into bread. Metals inch up when a coil misses a barge window. Diesel surcharges ride every truck. Nobody labels it river tax, but that's how it behaves. Seasonal volatility has become permanent derating. Plants program summer lows as operating reality. Output sags when the river warms and base flows thin. Inventories get buffered. Secondary warehouses get leased quietly. Procurement adds dual sourcing with extra miles and variants. Maintenance shifts into risk windows because running half tonnage isn't worth the wear. So was this foreseeable? Yes. Agencies flagged earlier melt and thinner base flows. Hydrologists showed snow lines climbing. Insurers baked surcharge ladders into models. Contracts adopted gauge triggers. Ports updated contingency SOPs. Everyone operationalized a temporary anomaly. That's not an anomaly anymore. That's policy by euphemism and a river that won't negotiate. Scale of exposure from basin to block. Zoom out from one number to the map money actually uses. The Rhine-Main-Danube corridor isn't a line, it's a spine with ribs. Freight clusters where industry grew up on water. The Rotterdam, Ruhr-Basel triangle, the chemical belt from Ludwigshafen to Leverkusen, steel around Duisburg, refineries strung past Cologne, and Switzerland plugged in at the head. Add the Main, Danube hinge and the basin touches the North Sea and the Black Sea in one sentence. That looks like redundancy until the river trims the words. The cargo mix explains the leverage. Along the Rhine, heavy shares dominate. Petroleum products, chemicals, ores, metals, aggregates. CCNR's first half 2023 ledger shows 31.66 million tons of petroleum products and 22.87 million tons of chemicals moving on the Rhine system, iron ore at 11.31 million tons, and container volumes down 15.8% year over year. These aren't optional flows, they're inputs that become plastics, coatings, fertilizers, diesel, heat, and steel. When water falls, those molecules don't defer, they sit. Start at the hinge. Rotterdam turns ocean drafts into river drafts. Miss a barge window there, and a lock 3 days later loses its place in line. Antwerp closes the vice. Chem parks tied straight into manifolds. Tank farms triaging parcels into smaller drafts. Duisburg is steel's lungs. Cologne is geometry made fragile by centimeters. Basel is Switzerland's maritime proxy. A sill below it changes a country's calendar. Substitution looks strong in a slide deck and brittle on a Tuesday. Trucks can't backfill 2,000-ton parcels at a price a balance sheet survives. Rail can carry trains, not dozens of barge equivalents every week, not without paths, sidings, and crews that don't exist on demand. That's why we'll switch if we need to becomes a rationing exercise. Who gets the train? Who gets the truck? Who gets the apology? Now the part households meet. In the same CCNR window, chemicals and containers slip together. Downstream, packaging lines stretch resin, blend grades, and buy air on critical films. The river tax doesn't print on receipts. It hides in 10-cent jumps, bread, detergent, diapers, because ammonia took the long way around and diesel picked up a surcharge. A refinery's barge missing by 6 hours turns into a canton's overtime on trucks and a hospital's quiet fuel drill. The river turns nodes into decision engines. A single miss-sequenced hour at Maasvlakte ripples into a missed lock pulse and a plant that has to skip a batch. Inland container terminals switch to emergency stacking. Reefers near power, barge-bound boxes staged by likelihood of water, truck pivots marked last resort. Basel pilots talk in fingers of depth. Wait for the noon pulse and you'll clear. Miss it and you're paying border posts with heat you didn't plan. Meanwhile, price translates physics. ARA Rhine liquid spot rates spiked in 2022's low water crush and normalized with depth in early 2023. Not drama, index curves drawing the river's handwriting across invoices. Letters of credit learn the same alphabet. Gauge triggers, presentation extensions, discrepancy waivers, all indexed to centimeters at Kaub and Maxau. Here's a human ledger that fits in a pocket. Eric, a coatings scheduler outside Leverkusen, moves a late resin lot from barge to truck and writes, "Hazmat route adds 2 days" on a whiteboard. His customer wants cars green on Friday. He rolls them to Monday, calls warranty, and okays a micro deviation. It's small until 3 plants repeat it. And below the headlines, quiet exposure stacks. Power plants that count on river cooling lose margin as water warms. A data center's peak collides with a hospital's generator test. Basel balances, writes a routine adjustment line, and hopes the call doesn't leak. The sequence isn't loud, it's precise. Redundancy still matters, locks modernize, groins adjust, side channels reconnect, but bottlenecks align under low water. One outage in a thin week rewrites a month. You can dredge a shoal and meet a hot spell that erases your centimeter with interest. Digital dispatch will squeeze idle time, it won't mint depth. So count exposure by sector. Chemicals, heavily, intermediates and solvents tied directly to barge rhythms. Steel directly, ore and coking coal inbound, slabs outbound on schedules that don't love detours. Autos subtly, harnesses, coatings, resins move on water even when finished cars move by rail. Energy quietly, diesel, gas oils, jet heating fuels rely on barge economics. Thin water derates not just plants, but fleets that need their products. And then the boundary of the block. Rotterdam slips by 6 hours, Suez wobbles, a carrier runs the Cape to catch a string, 2 weeks and thousands of tons of bunker added. Insurance shifts from war risk to weather premiums. A decision at Kaub puts ink on a ledger in Singapore. If you're looking for the baseline in a single sentence, it's this. The corridor became a single point of systemic truth. When the Rhine coughs, invoices across Europe wheeze, and the world hears it in late boxes, thin stocks, higher bids. The river doesn't argue, it sets the schedule. The question isn't whether we see that, it's whether we start planning on its calendar instead of ours. The human stake when water runs thin. Marco wakes before the wheelhouse glass goes grey. Kaub's at 78, he mutters, not to anyone, just to make the number real. He tightens a lashing he's already checked, breathes the diesel sweet air and sends a 10-second note home. Another anchor night, don't wait up. The deckhand asks about topping off at Bingen. Marco shakes his head. We'd miss the lock pulse. We lighten or we wait. The river has taken the vote. 30 kilometers inland, Anya moves magnets on a whiteboard, the factory's heartbeat. Red is resin late, amber is truck maybe, green is clear, too much red. She reorders blends toward SKUs with higher margin per ton and texts the plant's WhatsApp. Hold small pack until forwarder confirms. Pizza if we clear batch by 9. It's incentive and apology in one line. A minute later, force majeure notice from a supplier. She files it and keeps moving. At the hospital in Basel, Monica signs for drums of diesel and walks maintenance through the drill again. Transfer load 15 minutes. Once more, she adds 2 days to a spreadsheet cell that didn't exist 12 months ago. Fuel on hand. Patients will never see it, that's the point. In power trading, Luca nudges non-peak loads down 2% and writes a line for comms. Stable grid, prudent adjustment. No panic, just verbs. In Leverkusen, Eric, the coatings scheduler, leans over a map that's mostly timing. A late resin lot slides from barge to truck. Hazmat routing adds 2 days he doesn't have. He calls the OEM and swaps a paint variant for 2 trims, warranty rider attached. We'll rework if needed. He writes it on the glass wall because the whiteboard ran out of room. A nurse named Sophia stands in front of a pharmacy fridge watching a temperature readout that blinks steady, almost smug. The blister film came by air last night. A taxi from the airport, double the usual, triple if she counts the overtime she had to cut on the ward. She schedules 2 fewer elective cases next week and hates that it feels like an accounting trick. Downriver in Koblenz, Yusuf, a long-haul driver, buys diesel and doesn't look at the total. His dispatcher texted, short-haul shuttle, shallow terminal to deep, night only. He kisses his daughter's hair at the door and tells his partner he'll do pickups next week instead. If next week behaves, she says, half smiling. Their budget moves 20 euros from birthday to fuel. On a farm outside Bonn, Greta walks the edge of a field with a notebook she inherited from her grandfather. The co-op called Urea shipment rolled to next week. She runs her thumb down the old planting calendar and writes a new date in the margin. Then she writes lighter application because the river turned a barge into 3 trucks and the math doesn't care about her soil. In a Frankfurt back office, Aaron watches a margin call flash at 10:07, then a second at 10:11. He'd hedged freight exposure, not the absence of molecules. He calls credit, breathes through the script, and extends a line for a client whose pallets are sitting on the wrong key. "Send me the terminal receipts," he says, knowing they've already tried. At the Duisburg terminal, Marta, a crane operator, sits out a 15-minute reset because reefer plugs are maxed, and 1 row is down for maintenance no one could schedule in winter. She texts her mother, "Late tonight, heat's rough." Her hands shake a little on the joystick when the next lift comes in light. Everyone is lifting partials now. Back on the water, Marco gets the call, "Lighten 200 tons and you'll clear the sill." He knows what it costs. A floating crane, hours he doesn't have, a lock pulse he'll miss. He signs anyway. The insurer's circular sits beside the logbook. Document refusals, keep AIS on, avoid unlit anchorages. He writes the draft, the time, the instruction, then stares at the current curling over a rock his father taught him to avoid by the color of the foam. By midnight, these people, skipper, scheduler, nurse, driver, farmer, trader, crane operator, have rewritten a week to fit a river. None of them use the word resilience. They count centimeters, hours, euros, and promises. The river doesn't explain itself. It hands out instructions. They comply because the alternative is theater, and theater doesn't move freight, power an ICU, or keep a promise you made to a child about cake on Sunday. The origin story, how Europe bet on rivers. To understand why thin water feels like betrayal, go back to when water felt certain. In the late 194s and through the 195s, Europe rebuilt around what moved heavy, hazardous, hot rivers. Concrete was rationed, diesel was dear, and barges delivered thousands of tons with 1 engine and no asphalt. Ministries wrote permits around drafts, not detours. The Rhine wasn't scenery, it was policy. Industry followed physics. BASF spread at Ludwigshafen because a pipeline could kiss a jetty, and naphtha, ammonia, solvents arrived in sequence at prices that made exports work. Duisburg grew lungs for steel, ore and coking coal in, slabs out, tied to berths, sidings and cranes that assumed water. Post-war regulators waved through riverfront projects faster than inland bids. Show reliable intake and discharge, and you cleared hurdles. The bet was simple. Winter would store water, summer would spend it on schedule. Ports closed the loop. Rotterdam modernized into Europe's hinge, ocean drafts turning into river drafts at Maasvlakte, and Antwerp wired chem parks straight into manifolds. Inland ports became industrial policy without the headline. Dredging budgets were votes. Groins, side channels, lock upgrades, each a centimeter bought that industry treated as certainty, not capacity. Rail never left, it specialized. Coils finished autos, containers took slots and timetables. Road took the flexible edge. The heaviest molecules, refined products, monomers, ores, fertilizers, stayed on water because water treats hazard and mass-like features. A convoy needs depth and a window, a train needs paths and people. The deeper the commitment to that logic, the better the margins looked, until the calendar shifted. Early warnings flickered and got filed. The dry summer of 1947, the drought of 1976, outliers on graphs, not mandates for change. Agencies tuned curves showing expected drafts by season. Industry read them like guarantees. Hydrologists in the 198s and 199s started muttering about shrinking Alpine snowpack, earlier melt, thinner late summer base flows. The notes were careful. The timelines fit between elections. Engineers responded with more steel and better dredges. If physics took centimeters, budgets would buy them back. Here's the who knew and who chose. Waterway agencies published service targets. 10T corridors inked river names in bold. Companies wrote risk paragraphs about climate variability and went back to EBITDA. Boards funded pilots with cameras, hydrogen hulls, smarter locks, while deferring the boring money. Sidings, extra tankage, duplicate molds, inland depots on a second watershed. Ministries loved resilience as tone, roadmaps, road shows, because mandatory buffers and binding gauge triggers draw enemies. Everyone could announce. No one wanted to pay for the plumbing that saves August. Meanwhile, the substitution myth took root in slides. Rail can surge, road can flex in extremis. The caveat was always temporary, and the infrastructure underneath didn't care about adjectives. Sidings weren't built for a chemical belt's worst day. Bridges weren't rated for convoys big enough to replace barges. Warehousing clustered by jetties, not highway ramps. Banks financed tanks on water, not speculative inland depots just in case. Physics answered with tempo. Peaks slid forward. Warm spells bunched. Sediment shifted sills where drafts mattered most. The Rhine taught a new baseline. Finance learned faster than politics. Insurers indexed clauses to centimeters at Kaub and max. Below ~120 cm, drafts tighten. Around ~78 cm, operators strip loads, flirt with cm, and the corridor derates hard. P&I circulars told skippers to log refusals and keep AIS on. Freight indices wrote the same lesson. ARA Rhine spot rates spiked in 2022's low water crush, then eased as depth returned in early 2023. Price drew the hydrograph. Follow the money and you see the incentives. Underwriters don't underwrite heroism, they price time. Rail operators promise surge if someone else pays for steel and crews. Terminal lobbies push selective deepening over mandatory river reserve inventory. Boards greenlight glossy pilots that soothe investors and skip the capex that looks like plumbing on a quarterly deck. Politicians trade dredge announcements for headlines and ignore floodplain reconnections that would give sediment somewhere else to sit. Voters reward ribbon cuttings. Everyone hopes. Hope is cheap until August. This is how Europe bet on rivers, by design, then by habit, then by inertia. It worked spectacularly for decades. Exports scaled, energy flowed, households got cheaper goods than asphalt could deliver. The price was invisible, a reliance on Alpine cold storage that warming is closing. The old plan had one lever, more concrete. Useful, not decisive. You can deepen a bend, you can't pour snow onto a ridge. So the origin story ends with a schedule. The river kept one, we kept another. The gap widened into surcharges, demurrage, and policy euphemisms. The question was, did they know? They did. The question was, who chose to delay? The answer sits in budgets, not presses. Capex moved from plumbing to pilots, and the river kept time. Anatomy of a low-water collapse. It starts with a number at Kaub sliding from comfort toward constraint. Above 2 meters, captain's plan. Below 120 centimeters, they hedge. Around 78, they cut. Flirt with 40 to 50, and the corridor derates like a factory after breaker trips. The first moves are quiet. Dispatch trims loads. A captain radios -40, and the dock chief answers, lighten 200 tons and you'll clear the sill. A floating crane groans. Every extra lift becomes an hour. Every hour becomes a missed lock pulse 2 days later. Q politics assemble themselves. Chemicals and medicals jump the line, aggregates and scrap move back. Just 1 more centimeter turns into currency. Terminal planners juggle lists with a fairness they can't prove, while every favor earns a memory that will cost next season. Inside plants, shift boards stutter. A coatings batch slips behind a packaging run because the resin for one arrived by truck. The film for the other still sits on deck.